Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonSetsTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana episode. All supplies I'm using for this project are listed and linked in the video description below. Today I'm creating Valentine's Day cards with the Simon Says Stamp mixed labels and Love and Valentine's Word Mix 2 stamp sets. I wanted to create some simple Valentine's Day cards, and I wanted them to look a little bit like notebooks, just to try something different for a change. So here I have my first stamp set. This is the mixed labels set, and I'll also be using the coordinating die. And I really like this set because it includes all sorts of different labels in different sizes and different shapes. I picked one at the top there with the dotted lines as I like that one the most, and it was also large enough to fit my sentiment. And you'll see what kind of sentiment I'll use in a minute. So here I have my mini MISTI stamping tool. I already have a sheet of cardstock. This is Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I have my Waffle flower grip mat inside my MISTI, and the grip mat is holding the paper in place, so I'm not using the magnets. And I'm going to stamp the label using Simon Says Stamp LATTE ink. You know, I'm so used to stamping everything in black ink. I hardly ever reach for any other colors of ink, and this time I decided it was time to do something different. It was time to try and use some other ink color, so I reached for this LATTE color, and I really like this color combination. So I'm going to have a lot of pink on my heart, like very light pink. Then I'm going to have this touch of light brown, and I'll also add touches of red. I think it's a really nice and sweet color combination for Valentine's Day cards. I was going to say Christmas cards, but no, Valentine's Day cards. Okay, moving on. So with that done, with the labels stamped, I stamped more than one label because I wanted to create more Valentine's Day cards. It's not that I needed more. I was just having fun in my craft room. You know, I was feeling inspired, so I went and I stamped multiples. Okay, moving on. The next stamp set that I have here it's an older set. By the way, the labels one is also an older set, but it's one of my favorites. So this one is the Love and Valentine's Word Mix 2 set. And this is a very cool and special set because, as you can see, there are two groupings of stamps. And if you have a coordinating die, the idea is that you stamp all of these images at once. They're all connected. And then you use the coordinating die to cut them all at once. So this is a brilliant set, and it is intended to be used in a different way. It's not intended to be used the way I'm using it here. Now, because I only wanted to stamp one sentiment, that Happy Valentine's Day sentiment, and I wanted to stamp it over my label, I did cut my stamp apart using scissors. If you noticed, I've actually cut some of the other stamps apart because I do like to use these sentiments separately. So my stamp set is all cut up, but that does not prevent me from using the coordinating dies, or it does not prevent me from using it as intended. I can still put the stamps back together and stamp them all at once if I need to. So here I'm stamping the Happy Valentine's Day sentiment using VersaFine ONYX black ink. I did treat my paper with anti-static powder. That was sort of like a last minute decision because I want to heat set the black stamping using clear embossing ink. I really like the VersaFine ONYX black ink for any sort of black stamping, but this ink takes a little bit longer to dry. So whenever I'm using it, I like to add clear embossing powder on top to heat set it. And here I have added clear detail embossing powder. I used my heat tool and I set the powder in place to melt it. And now I have this beautiful shine added to my sentiment. Next, I used a coordinating die. I taped it in place using Spellbinder's Best Ever Craft Tape, and I used my die cutting machine, this is the Spellbinder's Platinum 6, to cut these cute little labels out. And look at that. I just think the label is super adorable. Now I'm also using Fun Foam from my stash, and I'm cutting identical labels from Fun Foam. I'm going to use those to pop my labels up on my card. If you don't have Fun Foam, you can just as easily use double-sided foam tape or foam adhesive squares. I happen to have a ton of this Fun Foam, and I'm trying to use it for my projects. Next step is to create a little sub-sentiment. So here I have a sheet of red cardstock. This is the Simon Says stamp Schoolhouse Red. I treated it with an anti-static powder, and I'm going to stamp a little sentiment. It reads, "I adore you." It comes from that same Love and Valentine's word mix 2 stamp set. I also cut this one out. So I'm going to stamp this in clear embossing ink and heat emboss this in white embossing powder. So I'm adding a little pop of red to my card. Just going to add the detail white embossing powder on top and zap it with my heat tool real quick to melt the powder. Once I'm done heat setting the powder, I give it a few seconds to cool, and then I use a pencil eraser and I just erase the anti-static powder from my paper. You can see that the paper has this sort of milky finish to it. So in order to get rid of that, I use a pencil eraser. You can also use a Swiffer cloth if you want. Now I'm going to cut this apart using scissors, and then I will use the coordinating die and cut the banners out. I'm not actually using the die that is intended for this little sentiment. The one that is intended for it is a little rectangle. I want to cut this one out using a banner die because I want it to have that little V at the end. So I'm using a different die from this set, and I'm just taping it in place using my best ever craft tape. With the die cutting done, I'm using scissors to snip this apart because I want this to appear as if it is a little bit longer on my card, and you'll see that in just a minute. Next, let's create a background. Here I have a sheet of light pink cardstock. This is going to be the background of my card, and I'm using the Swiss dot embossing folder from Simon Says Stamp. Again, I'm using my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine, and I'm just going to send this through my machine to add the beautiful dotted embossing. It's such a simple design, but it's very classy. And I feel like these dots make a timeless background or a timeless design. Next, once again, I'm using my fun foam, and I'm just going to cut a sheet of fun foam just slightly smaller than my background so that I can use that to adhere my embossed dots background onto my card base. You don't need to do this. I, however, like to add dimension to my cards. I like my cards to feel thick in my hand. So I'm adding this extra layer of fun foam to do that. Now that I have all of my pieces ready, it's time to assemble our cards. I'm going to use double-sided tape to adhere my backgrounds, my embossed backgrounds onto the fun foam, and then adhere those onto A2 top folding card bases. So the cards I'm making today measure 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And like I said, you can definitely skip using the fun foam, but I wanted these cards to have the appearance of a notebook. So I needed to add some dimension without making the card too heavy, and thus the fun foam worked perfectly here. Next, I'm using scissors and I'm trimming the label die cuts, fun foam die cuts slightly. I do this because when you die cut fun foam, it squishes a little bit, and sometimes the fun foam die cut can stick out from behind your paper die cut. It somehow becomes just a tiny bit bigger. So I like to trim mine using scissors just to make it a tiny bit smaller so that I don't have any fun foam sticking from behind my paper die cut. You could have also just cut those using scissors. You did not need to use a die, but that's just my process. I use a coordinating die and then I trim it using scissors. So next I'm using glue and I'm adhering the fun foam pieces from behind my labels. And with that done, I'm going to adhere my red sentiment banners behind this label. So I'm just going to add the I love you from the bottom and that little piece from the top. And to me, this sort of looks like a little red bookmark. I feel like it adds a nice extra little touch to this card. Just using my Barely Arts glue and the grid lines on my craft mat to make sure that everything is nice and aligned. And I have found that it helps to use magnets to press things down while the glue is drying. All we need to do now is just add those labels onto our card fronts. And once again, I'm using my Barely Art glue and sticking those onto my embossed backgrounds. and then adding a magnet on top to make sure that things are going to stay nice and secure. And finally, I'm using these little hearts from my stash to decorate the cards. Now, the hearts that I have, they are not quite the correct shade of red. I wanted them to be a little bit darker red. So I used my Copic markers and I just colored over the hearts to make sure they matched the color red that I had on my background. I used Bearly Art glue and I adhered them in place. So here's a look at the cards I have for you today. I love how adorable these turned out, and I can't wait to give them to my friends. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you feel inspired to create. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you share it online and tagged us on social media. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.
I'm Heidi, Simon's mama and founder at simonsaysstamp.com. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like what you just saw, be sure to press the thumbs up and subscribe to see more great content.